Hey there, welcome back to Geeky Greenhouse. In today's video, we'll be talking about 7 mistakes to avoid with your tomato seedlings.
So even if you're a really experienced gardener, you may find some of these tips useful, and a lot of these mistakes we actually have made ourselves when we started gardening.
But now we have nothing but nice, healthy tomato seedlings by avoiding these mistakes.
The first tomato seedling mistake we want to talk about is leaving the humidity dome on for too long. You want to be sure to remove the humidity dome as soon as the seeds germinate and sprout. And you can remove the seed heating mat when you remove the humidity dome as well. This is a really common mistake that beginners make because they just don't know when to take the humidity dome off of their seedlings. However, too much humidity can cause a really stuffy environment that fosters damping off and other diseases to develop.
So the humidity dome really is just a germination tool. It's not intended for actually growing the plants. It's just a tool to use until the seeds sprout. If you grow a lot of tomatoes and some of them have sprouted and others have not, just remove the cells that have sprouted and leave the others under the humidity dome. But if you have some that are in the same cell, you can actually use tiny plastic cups or even just saran wrap over the cells that haven't sprouted yet.
So be vigilant and keep a really close eye on your seedlings. As soon as you see them hooking, you want to remove the humidity dome right away.
The next mistake to avoid with your tomato seedlings is not giving them enough light. As soon as the seeds sprout, they need light. You want to have them in a location with as much natural light as possible, or ideally under grow lights.
It is worth noting that if you're a really casual gardener or if you're new to growing tomatoes, you don't need to invest in a really expensive grow light. If you have a good south-facing window that gets plenty of light, that's perfectly adequate for growing tomato seedlings. However, you will have better results if you do use a grow light.
If you are using grow lights, the hanging height is pretty important. If you're using LEDs, they're typically hung a little bit higher than if you have fluorescent bulbs, which need to be a little closer to the seedlings. Another lighting tip for tomato seedlings is to rotate the trays every day or so, especially if you're growing in the window, because the seedlings will have a tendency to stretch towards the light. So rotating will help prevent them from bending.
The next tomato seedling mistake is overwatering. Overwatering can lead to a lot of issues like fungus gnats and root rot, and can even kill your plants. It's very easy to overwater your seedlings, so we do recommend bottom watering your seedlings, especially in the beginning. So by bottom watering, you're allowing for more even watering and also keeping the foliage dry, which can help prevent disease as well. After giving your tomato seedlings a good drink with bottom watering, be sure to always empty out the excess water as well. You don't want to leave any standing water in your seedling trays.
The next mistake with tomato seedlings is not fertilizing, and this is very common, especially if you start your seeds in a seed starter mix. Seed starter mixes are nice and light and fluffy, perfect for germinating seeds and growing small root systems, but they often don't contain nutrients, so that means you need to fertilize your plants. If you are using seed starter mix, after about a week of growth is a good time to start fertilizing. You want to use a reduced strength of fertilizer, so if it recommends 1 teaspoon per gallon, for instance, you would use a half a teaspoon or maybe even a quarter teaspoon instead. It's just as important not to over-fertilize your seedlings, so if you plant it in regular potting soil like we did here, which has nutrients built in, you don't have to add more at this stage.
The topic of fertilization can definitely be kind of scary for new gardeners, so just read the back of the bottle or whatever fertilizer you're using. Typically it has some recommendations for what strength to use. The next tomato seedling mistake is not thinning your tomato seedlings early enough. When you're planting seeds, often you put more than 1 seed in the spot, just in case some of them don't germinate. However, it's really important that when they begin to sprout, you thin them properly to give the strongest seedlings the best chance. It can definitely be really painful to thin perfectly good seedlings, so if you have the space for it, you can divide them and put them in separate pots. But it's important to do this early so that the root systems don't get tangled up and the seedlings aren't competing with one another.
So we like to just uproot them when they're really young. Just a few days after sprouting is usually a good time. It's easy enough to identify which of the seedlings are the strongest, so you leave those and pluck out the others. Alternatively, you can use pruning shears or scissors to snip off the base of the plants you're discarding. The next mistake is not hardening off your plants to the outdoors. Basically anything that you start indoors that's been growing indoors under grow lights or even in a sunny window needs to be hardened off or acclimated to the outdoor conditions. Outdoors you have direct sunlight, you have wind, you have precipitation. All of these factors the plants have not experienced yet, so you have to slowly introduce them. For tomatoes, it's usually a matter of a week or maybe a little bit longer to harden them off to the outdoors. But if you rush this process, you might end up seeing burnt leaves, sun scald, and even knocked over plants from strong winds.
Putting a fan for a gentle breeze on your seedlings will also help keep them nice and strong and kind of help prepare them for the outdoor environment.
So we'll usually start the hardening off process about a week or two before we're planning on getting our plants outdoors permanently, but you do want to make sure that the outdoor temperatures are at least 60 or 65 degrees Fahrenheit, and you want to bring them back indoors overnight. It's always best to start hardening off on a cloudy day, so you're not just putting them out directly into some sunlight. They get some nice cloudy, filtered sunlight on their first day or two, and then you can start gradually introducing more and more sunlight. Just as important on the topic of temperature is to not take your tomatoes outdoors too early. It's very common to have a beautiful warm day in early spring, and you think now's a great time to get my plants into the ground, only to have the temperatures go down into the 40s, sometimes even the 30s, causing damage to your tomatoes. So be patient, wait for the temperatures overnight to not go below 55 degrees Fahrenheit, usually 2 or 3 weeks after your last frost date.
And another quick tip on that note is to use milk jugs if your tomato plants are already planted in the ground outside. It kind of creates a little greenhouse effect and can protect them against the cold temperatures. Our next tomato seedling mistake is not planting the tomatoes deep enough. Tomatoes are one of the few summer crops that actually prefer being planted deep. The stems produce new roots which help better establish the plant and protect it against strong winds. So when you're ready to plant your tomato seedlings out in the ground, a good rule of thumb is to plant them all the way to the first leaves, also known as the cotyledons.
So those are some of the most common mistakes that we've seen people making and that we've made ourselves. If you have any additional tips or mistakes to avoid, let us know in the comments below.
And if you're enjoying our content, be sure to follow us over at our Geeky Greenhouse Instagram account, where we post everything except peppers.
Thanks for watching Geeky Greenhouse, and we'll see you next time.
My hands, like, what do I do with my hands, you know?
I do a lot of this, and people have called me out on it too.
Yeah,
like, that's annoying.
At least you don't have the beard anymore, because you were doing a lot of this, remember?
I do have a beard.
Well, that's true.